growth of nationalism in Europe brought sweeping changes in the political and mental world of Europe. Political world means that gradually the countries in the continent were emerging as nation states as a result of revolutions, as a result of the struggle for the unification, and there was change in the mental world also, which means that the thinking of the people was totally changed, and now they could think about democracy, they could think about the new ideals of equality, liberty, fraternity, etc. A very good morning to all the listeners. We are talking about the growth of nationalism in Europe, a very different type of feeling, a very different type of circumstances, because in the colonies like India, the countries which were colonized, nationalism grew just because these colonies were ruled over by the foreigners, and the foreign rule was, according to them, it was exploitative, and they decided to free themselves from the colonial rule. So nationalism grew in the colonies. But the chapter about which we are studying, growth of nationalism in Europe, we are discussing that there was growth of nationalism in the different countries of European continent against their own autocratic kings, against their absolute monarchs, against the corruption of different institutions like church. So the growth of nationalism in Europe, growth of nationalism in different countries of Europe was totally different, a different concept about which we are talking. We are talking about the two empires that were ruling over in most of the part of Europe, that is Habsburg Empire and Bourbon dynasty, and there was hereditary system of accession, and this was going on. And there were autocratic monarchs, they were absolute, means they were uncontrolled kings. In the previous lecture, we discussed about Frederick Sorio, we discussed about Statue of Liberty, and we also discussed about certain important terms like nation state, which is a modern state. We also talked about the concept of nation state according to Ernest Renan. And we also talked about the terms like republic, social and democratic republics, sovereignty, sovereign control, etc. So now we switch over to French Revolution, about which you have read in class 9th in detail, that how against Louis XVI, against the misrule of Louis XVI, there was a revolution because the people, particularly the middle class, the third estate, workers and peasants, and the educated people, the professionals who were not happy with the way the king of France, Louis XVI, was working, as he was absolute king. So there was a revolution organized by the third estate, and after the revolution we have in your 10th class the topic, the measures adopted by the French revolutionaries to create a sense of collective belonging among the people of France. The third page of your chapter, the third and fourth pages of your chapter contains this topic, that what were the measures adopted by the French revolutionaries so that all the people living in French territory, they would have a collective belonging, they would have an identity, a collective identity with them. So this 1789 was the year when it was the first expression of a republican revolution in France. And immediately after the French Revolution, certain measures were adopted by the French revolutionaries, in which you can give in points. The first and the foremost was that La Patrie and La Citoyen. Just look into your page 3 in chapter 1. La Patrie, it is a French word, and La Citoyen. So La Patrie means the fatherland, and La Citoyen means the citizens, which means that the French revolutionaries, after the revolution, they were so happy and they were so satisfied when Louis XVI was not there and they adopted a republican form of government. They said that we are the fatherland, because this was the period when there were patriarchal societies, and we know that in patriarchal societies father used to be the head of the family and he used to take all the decisions. So they declared as themselves as fatherland because all the other countries were motherland. So that means we are the decision makers, and whichever country in Europe want to become nation state, we are there. fatherland. And la citoyen means the citizens, that the ultimate power is lying with the citizens, the ultimate power, who will rule over them, what type of administration we want, this power to decide rests with the citizens. So this was the first measure or the first step adopted by the French revolutionaries. The second was a tricolor was adopted and the former royal standards were replaced. A tricolor, a French flag, was adopted to remind people that they all belong to the same nation and this is their national flag. Then National Assembly was renamed as the third estate, the Estate General was renamed as National Assembly, and which would make policies for the country like we have Parliament today, an elected body of National Assembly. A centralized administration was put forward, centralized administration. In center, there will be a government that will be elected by the people. And all the other, the ruling classes, the absolute institutions, they were abolished. Then martyrs were commemorated. Martyrs, whoever fought for the democratic and republican ideals for France, martyrs were commemorated and oaths were taken. Different oaths were taken so as to make their country a united country and a very consolidated country. Oaths taken. And new hymns were composed, because now people, as I told you, after the revolution they thought that now we are happy and now there is a republican and democratic form of government and our voice would be heard. So new hymns were composed all in the name of nation. To highlight their nation, to highlight the French Revolution, new hymns were composed. Correct? Then uniform currency, uniform weights and measures were adopted. Uniform currency, because earlier I told you that it was feudal system, there were different currencies, there were different weights and measures. Uniform currency, uniform weights and measures were adopted. Then it was also declared that French language would be the language of the common people. Other dialects were discouraged as French was spoken and written in Paris. Paris, the capital of France. So it was declared that the other dialects would be discouraged and French language became the language of the common people. Why? Again, come to the topic, to create a sense of collective belonging, to create a sense of collective identity among the people of France. So French language became the language of the common people. And there was overall growth, transportation and communication, etc. They were improved, and French revolutionaries further declared that if in the European continent any country, any European country wanted to get rid of the absolute monarchs as they had done by getting rid of Louis XVI. So if in any country people want to get rid of their absolute monarchs and they want to adopt republic, we are there to help you. This is ideal nationalism, about which we will talk again at the end of the chapter. Ideal nationalism, that we have become nation state, and if any other nation, if any other country at that time wanted to be the nation state, we are there to guide you, we are there to help you. And for that purpose Jacobin clubs were formed. This can be asked separately in 3 marks, what were Jacobin clubs, and if you are writing about the measures, you just write in one line that Jacobin clubs were formed in France, and even not only in France but even outside France also. If the question on Jacobin club in board examination is asked in 3 marks, or in your other examination of 3 marks question, you will write down that after the French Revolution, French revolutionaries further declared that it was the mission, and it is our mission, it is our obligation on the countries, that if any country of Europe wanted to get rid of their absolute monarch and they wanted to achieve nations, to become nation state, achieve republican and sovereign government, we are there to help you. So Jacobin clubs were formed by educated middle classes. Means in the Jacobin club mostly there were students, young students and teachers, and there were other educated people. Not only in France, but these Jacobin clubs were formed in other parts of Europe also to propagate the idea of French Revolution, equality, liberty and fraternity, and also to pave the way to the French armies to conquer the rest of Europe, to enter into Switzerland, Holland, much part of Italy and propagate the idea of French Revolution. So the Jacobin clubs, they paved the way, they showed the way to the French armies to enter in different parts of Europe and propagate their mission. So this was your 5 marks topic, measures adopted by the French revolutionaries to create a sense of collective belonging among the people of France. We quickly switch over to the 4th page of your chapter, that is the Civil Code of 1804, also known as Napoleonic Code of 1804. It is very important code. Why? Because for the first time in France, laws were codified. Before that, codification of laws was not adopted by any country. So it was by France and by Napoleon, who became the constitutional monarch of France after the French Revolution. After some obstacles, he became the constitutional monarch of France. So the Civil Code of 1804, or rightly called the Napoleonic Code, came into being, and you will see that remarkable changes were made in the administration. Actually, when Napoleon he ascended the throne, when he became the constitutional monarch of France, people expected a lot from Napoleon, and people expected that now true democracy will be established. But you know, Napoleon was more a conqueror than an administrator. He was more a conqueror than an administrator. Means he was a conqueror. He was a great conqueror and wanted to conquer the rest of Europe to extend the French territory, and less an administrator. But in the administrative field, he incorporated remarkable changes that really brought him to the limelight, and people in the beginning welcomed Napoleon and welcomed the French armies also as the harbingers of liberty. Because when I will tell you the Napoleonic Code of 1804, or rightly called the Civil Code of 1804, you yourself will realize that extraordinarily remarkable changes were introduced in the administrative system, in the administration of France. And not only this code was implemented in France, but it was exported to the other regions which were conquered by Napoleon. Holland, Switzerland, much part of Italy. In these parts also, Napoleonic Code was transported, it was implemented over there. Now what was it? What was Napoleonic Code of 1804? The first step, the first point, the first step that he adopted was privileges by birth were abolished, because at that time in the society there was privileged class. They were deprived of taxes. They did nothing for the growth and development of the society, but even then they enjoyed privileges, which means exemption of tax and privilege everywhere. So privileges by birth were abolished and equality before law was established. As in the measures also we discussed that all the French people will be equal before law. So in the Napoleonic Code again, equality before law was established, and right to vote was given to all the propertied males. Whoever propertied males, they had their own property, own house, own land, they all were given right to vote. The manorial dues on the peasants and workers were abolished, and feudalism and serfdom were abolished. Feudalistic society and serfdom, we will discuss about feudalism and serfdom in the next lecture. Here you must know that feudalism and serfdom were not good for the society, and they reminded the people about conservatism. They reminded the people about the absolute institutions. So feudalism and serfdom were abolished, and transportation and communication systems were improved. Guild restrictions were abolished. There were guilds, there were groups of people doing the same craft, artisans. So they had strict rules and regulation, and they didn't allow new people to enter into their guild. So they were economic groups, they were groups of people doing the same activity. So guild restrictions were abolished in the Napoleonic Code, and people welcomed Napoleon as he told them about what is democracy. But actually Napoleon destroyed democracy in France. Although in the administrative field he incorporated remarkable changes, as I told you, that all the older institutions were not there and everything modernized was introduced in the Napoleonic Code. Even today, when the Duma, that is law-making body of France, if Duma want to know something about a law during the formation of laws, they take help of the Napoleonic Code. It is so important. But actually he destroyed democracy, because I told you right to vote was limited. It was given only to the propertied males. However, in the administrative field, he was very much aware about giving equality and freedom to the people. Businessmen, new professional class, they all welcome Napoleon as a harbinger of liberty. But after some time, people realized that democracy, instead of being established in the country, it was destroyed. Three things went against Napoleon and people began to hate him like anything. So these three things were that because to maintain a modern army, I told you Napoleon was more a conqueror than an administrator. So to conquer the rest of Europe, he wanted to build a huge army, and for that he needed money. So number one, increased taxation. Taxes were increased. Nobody likes increased taxes. So people hated Napoleon. Second, forced conscription. Conscription itself means into the army. Forced, jabardasti, forced conscription into the army. That was not liked by the people. And so these two things, they went against Napoleon. And third, censorship. Censorship, which is a pillar of democracy, that censorship should not be there. Pillar of democracy is freedom to press. So this was also curtailed. Nobody will write anything against Napoleon or against the French Revolution. Everything in the newspapers and magazines and other articles would be written in favor of Napoleon and in favor of French Revolution. So after some time, and right to vote again, previously I told you it was limited. It was given only to the propertied males. So people began to hate him. These three things overweighed the remarkable administrative changes that were introduced by Napoleon. So they overweighed his reforms. Correct? Okay. So that is all for today. In next lecture, we will discuss about again the factors for the growth of nationalism in Europe. We will discuss in detail that what were the types of kingdoms, what were the different ethnic groups, they were living in only one empire or only one country, and how there was growth of nationalism in the countries. So prepare your notes up to page 3 and 4, first, second, third and fourth pages. Prepare all the notes. We will meet again with a new lecture and some new thing for you. Till then, it is a very goodbye.